Welcome back to Chuds BBQ, everybody. My name is Bradley Robinson, and today I'm gonna give you my 5 tips for the perfect pulled pork. Coming up. This is a pork butt. Pat it dry. I picked this up at my local H-E-B. This is just your standard run-of-the-mill pork butt, which is tip number 1. You want to get yourself a bone-in pork butt, preferably one with a nice good fat cap on there. I see a lot of people that like to remove the fat cap or score it, but I really don't think that's necessary. And it's half the reason why I love cooking pork butts so much. It really is the perfect cut for the beginner because there's zero trimming, zero butchery required. They're cheap, they're readily available, and they're really hard to screw up. So get yourself a bone-in pork butt, fat cap on. They're a lot cheaper when you get them bone-in, and that bone is really gonna help this cookout because it's not gonna have big gashes in it where the butcher had to remove the bone. It's gonna add some thermal mass to the inside, which is really gonna help this thing cook evenly. So now we move on to tip number 2, which is the rub. Because pulled pork isn't a traditional Texas cut, there really aren't any traditions that we have to uphold. So while you can use just salt and pepper and have great results, using some more complex rubs works out really well for making your pulled pork. That being said, I've done plenty of pork butts using just salt and pepper. It works out really well. You get that kind of briskety bark on top, and as long as you have salt, pepper, smoke, it's really all you need. But a pork butt lends itself to so many different flavor profiles really well. You can do sweet, you can do spicy, you can do savory. It always comes out great. So today we're going on with some good old-fashioned Chud Rub. This is a rub I make. I sell it online at shopchuds.com. This is great. It's a very pepper-heavy rub, but essentially it's 2 parts 16 mesh black pepper, 1 part diamond crystal kosher salt with some paprika, garlic, other savory flavors in there. It works really well on a lot of things, especially pulled pork. Nothing to it, folks, just a nice heavy coating all the way around. It's a big chunk of meat, so we don't really need to worry about over salting it or anything like that. I'm also not a big fan of binders, but on a pulled pork, because we're shredding this thing up at the end, you could get away with whatever you want. A little mustard is always nice, but this thing is plenty tacky for this rub to stick. And please, folks, don't forget the sides. Come on. So that's my tip number 2, just choose a fun rub. It's a really good time to experiment with new rubs, making your own, but you can also just get away with good old salt and pepper. Because like I mentioned, pulled pork is incredibly versatile and incredibly forgiving. It's also nice because we don't really need to worry about the presentation nearly as much because this is getting all shredded up at the end of the day. So it's not like a brisket where we need that bark to be perfectly intact and have that aesthetic appearance. Oh, this is a big boy. This is gonna be a long cook. Should have got started sooner. Looking good to me. Let's fire up the pit. There's a snake in my boot in 4K. So, on the pit we go. Tip number 3 is all about the cook. And again, we're not aiming for a specific texture like we are on brisket, beef ribs, pork ribs, where you want it to be as tender as possible without completely falling apart. But we're making pulled pork, so we want this to completely fall apart. So we're basically aiming for maximum tenderness, but you can't go too far and turn it into mush. But because it's a little more forgiving than those other cuts, we can rock this at a higher temperature, which is something I love to do. So behind me right now, this pit is going at about 300 degrees, 275, 300, in that range. If it goes up to 325, I'm not worried about it. And you could cook this thing at 220, 250 if you wanted to. It's just gonna add a lot of time to your cook, and the results aren't gonna be much better. So I highly recommend cooking a little on the hotter and faster side. Also, when I placed it on, I like to aim the bone, the flat side of the shoulder blade bone, towards the fire, because if there's any part of that pork butt that can take the brunt of the heat, that is it. Especially because that bone is gonna insulate the meat surrounding it, so to have a little extra attention paid to that bone is really gonna make sure this thing cooks evenly. So on the pit this goes, I'm rocking a post oak fire, 300 degrees like I normally do, and I'm not gonna touch it, I'm not gonna do anything except maintain temperatures for the next 6 to 8 hours until it's time to wrap this thing up. 8 hours later, this pork butt is coming off the pit. Whoo, that is hot. Ow. As you can see, we have got a lovely bark on this thing, and that fat cap is feeling super tender. You can tell just kind of by squishing it. It's got that nice rendered, crispy vibe going on. Definitely a little darker than I'm used to because usually I go with salt and pepper on a pork butt, but all those powdery spices have darkened this thing up a little bit, but also added wonderful flavor. Internal temp, we're rocking right around 170, 175 degrees, which is where I really like to wrap a pork butt. For a brisket, I usually aim a little hotter on 180, and that's because I don't want to steam the brisket too much in the wrap, but because we're going to be shredding this into pulled pork, having that extra moisture is just going to help us in the long run. Ooh. When it comes to wrapping your pulled pork, you can do pretty much anything you want. A full foil wrap is a really great thing for a pork butt. Again, it's going to steam it, it's going to cook it all the way through as quickly as possible. All the juices are going to be collected in the foil wrap, which is going to tenderize it from both sides along with the steam, and it's a great way to have a really quick finish on a pulled pork while making sure everything is nice and juicy. You could also paper wrap this thing. I don't see people doing that much. Doesn't really make sense, but it would definitely work really well if that's all you got. You could also not wrap this thing, but as you can see, these edges are starting to get a little bit crispy, so softening everything up and kind of letting it continue cooking in a more humid environment is definitely going to help out. I just want to pull a little corner off so bad. Oh yeah, save me for myself. But if you know this channel, you know I'm going with the foil boat. It's my preferred wrap on this channel, and for good reason. You know, that foil is gonna help cook this thing from the bottom while insulating the sides, which is gonna make it cook a lot quicker. Yet this big old fat cap on top is gonna stay exposed, which means it's gonna get nice and rendered. We're gonna get some like bacony, crispy bits on top, which when mixed throughout the pulled pork is gonna be so flavorful. And that is my tip number 4. Give this thing the foil boat. It is designed for a pork butt. The foil boat works great with any cut that has a fat cap on it. And like I mentioned, because we're gonna be shredding this up, having that extra heat on the bottom, because we're wrapping it around 165, 175 internal, we're gonna have a little extra juice, which is gonna really tenderize the bottom of this thing. It's gonna speed up the cook, and we're gonna get a little extra smoke on there. So, let's wrap it up. Ooh. That's how you know it's not ready yet. If you can pick it up by the bone, not quite there. Although these little edges are done. Beautiful little foil boat pork butt going back on the pit. It's at this stage too that you could really bump these temps up if you're in a hurry. Now that it's got that foil protection, it's already got a nice bark on there. All we're doing now is waiting for this thing to come up to an internal temp of around 200, 205 degrees. While we wait for our pork butt to come up to temp, let's go ahead and get the rest of our accoutrement ready for the inevitable pulled pork sandwich that we're gonna make. Starting with some apple cider vinegar, brown sugar, pinch of black pepper, granulated garlic, little bit of cumin because I'm feeling frisky, some MSG, optional, paprika, some red pepper flakes, some mustard, little bit of hot sauce, some Worcestershire sauce, and a little bit of spicy ketchup. We're gonna let that come up to a simmer just to let all of those spices and sugars dissolve. Looking good. And to be honest, I just threw this together with things that I had in arm's reach. As long as your sauce is acidic and has a little bit of spice to it, it's gonna be good. You know, you could use straight up hot sauce, it would be great. You could use straight up apple cider vinegar, it would be great. But making your own is kind of fun, and it makes you look a lot more professional in front of your friends and family. But it is looking a little thin. Perfect. Nothing to it. Next up, we're gonna make a quick barbecue slaw, which simply means some sliced up cabbage with a little bit of barbecue sauce on top. Super lazy, super easy, very quick, great for a sandwich. With the hog sauce, we got some really nice acidity. This barbecue slaw is gonna add some nice crunch as well as a little bit more sweetness. And it's just so lazy, I love it. After 12 hours, this pork butt is finally done. Whew, that is hot. And yeah, this one took a long time. When I was at the store, I thought about getting the 6-pounder. That would have saved a lot of time, but this 10-pounder just had a much better fat cap and a lot better intramuscular fat. And you know what? Sometimes the extra hours are worth it, because if you're gonna spend all day cooking a pork butt, you might as well get one that is gonna be beautifully probe tender. Oh, feels like butter. Rocking about 203 degrees internal, feeling nice and tender, right to the bone. Love it, got that crunchy bark on top. We're gonna let this rest down for probably about an hour, maybe 45 minutes or so, until this comes down to an internal temperature of about 150 degrees, and then we will shred it up. It's looking nice, feeling nice and tender. Shall I give the old bone test? Oh, how you doing? That's how you know, folks. Look at that. There's no faking that. And that's why you get a bone-in pork butt, because at the end of the day, it comes right out. Let's shred this up. Oh, God, what doesn't look good about that, folks? Oops. All that juice, all that fat, glistening. All we gotta do now is just break in. Nice and tender. I mean, just the fat cap on here alone, it's so barky. It's got this crispiness to it from that foil boat. I'm gonna have to dive into a little piece of that real quick. Oh my good. That is unbelievably flavorful. Top layer, got that wonderful smoke ring on there, pulling apart like pork belly. Love it. This is perfect texture right here. You know, it's not completely mush. We still got some really nice texture in there. All this bark is breaking apart and getting evenly distributed, so we're gonna have flavor all the way throughout. Oh, that is a perfect pulled pork in my opinion. Best thing you can get other than whole hog. Got these bark pieces, they're so sticky. Love it. And there you have it, folks. Perfect pile of pulled pork. But we're not done yet. We still gotta add in our hog sauce. Just a healthy drizzle. All that acidity and brightness is really gonna help cut through all the fattiness, the saltiness, the smokiness. I mean, what more do you need in life than that, folks? A little bit of bark, some tangy sauce. I gotta give this a try. Oh, man. That might be the best pulled pork I've ever made on the channel. Martin's potato roll. Nicely toasted. A lovely mound of your beautiful pulled pork. Juicy, tender, smoky. These little pieces of bark, oh, so good. And we're gonna top that off with our little barbecue slaw we made for even more flavor and even more texture. And then we top it off. Boop. It's fatty, tangy, smoky, salty, sweet. It's all the best flavors in perfect balance. I need to take a bite. That is so good. So simple. The tang from the sauce, the sweetness from the barbecue slaw, the crunch, the lovely smoky flavor. So tender, so juicy. Oh my God, I can't stop. I'm going back in. So good. So to recap my 5 tips for the perfect pulled pork. 1, get yourself a bone-in pork butt with a nice fat cap on there. Don't trim it, don't score it, don't do anything, just leave it as is. 2, use your favorite rub. This is the time and place to experiment with new rubs, whether they're homemade, store-bought, spicy, sweet, unique, you name it. Salt and pepper does work great, but if there is ever a time to experiment with new rubs, this is it. 3, cook it hot and fast. Again, I was rocking 300 degrees for most of the time on this cook, and this thing turned out perfectly. You're gonna save a lot of time, and if you don't get the largest pork butt at the grocery store, you can get away with a 6 or 8 hour cook. 4, give it the old foil boat. I highly recommend it. Leaving that fat cap exposed really gives you that crispy bark, extra smoke flavor, helps it cook quicker, and it ensures that you're gonna render down that thick fat cap that you left on. And then tip number 5, make yourself a nice tangy sauce. Again, it can be as simple or as complex as you like. There are tons of recipes out there for vinegar-based sauces, but as long as you got some nice tang and heat to help combat all that heavy smoke and fat flavor in this thing, you're gonna end up with some amazing pulled pork at the end of the day. But if you enjoyed this video, let me know by hitting that subscribe button and dropping a like on this video. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you want to see me cook next. If you give this recipe a try for yourself, be sure to tag me on Instagram at Chuds BBQ. I love to see what y'all are cooking. Big shout out to all the Patreon members. Thank you for supporting Team Chud and allowing me to keep making all these videos. And until the next time I see you, please go cook something outside. Peace. Ow.